Good evening, good evening, good evening. It's the pull up. What can I tell you? It's a Thursday. Thursdays are very important days around here, and hopefully important days in your
Oh
life
yeah.
if you are joining us. Hello, mother. We are still in separate places, but I can report that this will be the last time that we are in separate places. Even though I like the way that this looks visually, so maybe we'll figure that out in the house. But I like the way it looks visually. Anywho,
Wait,
um,
we
yes.
missed my birthday.
No,
We didn't.
actually, we did not miss your birthday. We talked about it, but we didn't come back to it, and it was really because we were having technical difficulties.
Yeah.
So let's all collectively put our hands together and clap, clap, bravo, as Drake used to say for Pammy's B Day. We were supposed to get back to it, but if you watched last week's episode, the devil was in the monitors, and so we had to finish it a different way. But you will get the full scope of the conversation. The live is what it is, but you'll get the full scope of the conversation once I finish the edit. But today, speaking of honoring the parents, we're going to have a discussion about parenting. I think this is something that often gets overlooked because people just think that because they can have a baby, that means that they will be a great parent. And
Mm.
dare I say, baby making and parenting is two different things,
Two
to
different
quote
things.
the great Clifford Tip T.I. Harris. Two different things. And I think we don't talk about it a lot, particularly in the Black community and Black space. I think Black people have gotten a bad rep for parenting in a lot of ways, but also I think Black people have been doing incredible things with parenting, particularly in this last little stretch. We're actually in a transition period, okay, with parenting, I would say. Um, I don't have no kids, but I have plenty of nieces and nephews. I have watched many, many children over the years. So we're going to be talking about parenting today. And if that sounds like something you're into, you're down for, you are Brandy Rayana Norwood and you want to be down, then you should stick around because this episode is for you.
Hi, I'm Pam Williams, a mother.
And I'm Jessica E. Williams, a daughter. And this is a mother and a daughter truthful chat, where we discuss our 35-year multi-layered relationship.
We've been through so many ups and downs. Not only are we family, but we're business partners in the high-stress world of event planning and production for short films.
We've also shared the same therapist for over 10 years. What some people call codependence, we call collaboration.
So join us as we share stories from our lives,
Have candid conversations with other mother-daughter duos,
and shed light on the roller coaster ride of being a woman while raising a woman.
All right, people, it's time. Welcome to Truthful Chats. Hopefully, you got your mug. I'm still young, gifted, Black, and beautiful. Clink, clink.
And I'm still repping Dallas, even though I'm close to Houston.
You're definitely not in Dallas. But shout out to Dallas. We've had some good times.
Shout out to Dallas. It's one of our favorite places too. So
I do. I enjoy Dallas. We'll be
primarily
coming
because of the Potter's House, but
primarily because of Austin, but also it's a cool little city. We enjoy it.
yeah.
We'll be going to Austin a little
What
later
you
this
drinking?
year. Oh, some peach juice. I really got to the refrigerator and I was like, I don't even know if I have anything to drink because you know how your husband is with the grocery shopping. But I was like, oh, there's still juice. There's still juice in here. So peach juice. I finished the cranberry
Drink
juice.
some water. I'm trying to do better.
Anywho, what are you drinking in your mug? I think we should add that
Water.
to the comment section. No, I'm saying I
Water.
think we should drink.
Oh
No, I
yes,
think we
yes,
should add it to the comment section of when you was
yes.
watching
What are
this
you
episode
drinking?
of Truthful Chat.
What were
What
you
was you
drinking?
drinking? Put it in the chat. You don't have to be PG or nothing like that in the comments. You can be like, I was yakking and it was a good time. Anyway, welcome to Truthful Chats. Sorry, I was literally hydrating. I didn't realize my throat was that dry. But I definitely already drank water today. Here's the thing. Y'all swear to me that hydration is the key to life. And I feel like no matter how much water I drink, I am never satiated. I feel super bloated and I don't appreciate it, which is why I drink a lot of Pedialyte and coconut water. and other water additives just because I just don't believe it. Anyway, that's an aside. Welcome, Truthful Chats. If you're just not joining us for the very first time, welcome. This is how we do it, very informal. It's what it is. If you are back,
Mother-daughter conversations.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Well, welcome back. So Truthful Chats is a weekly podcast series that we host here at Create Generational Wellness, as you can see from this cute graphic that I like, that I hope we get to keep because I think it just says a lot instead of you just looking directly at us all the time. Anyway, aesthetics. So Create Generational Wellness is the brand, the I don't want to call it I feel like if you call it a movement, and it's the people determine that, okay? But it's our offering
We'd like
to you.
for it to be a movement.
We would, but it's our offering to you about what we are about. And if you have never heard the term Create Generational Wellness ever, that makes sense because we made it up. Therefore, as I say every week, if you hear somebody yapping off in the gums in the streets using a term that doesn't belong to them, you know what to do. Try Jesus, don't try me, okay? So anyway, here at Create Generational Wellness, we have a theme of the month. Every month we unpack that theme via our weekly Truthful Chats. It's the end of February. I'm so sad. You know, February is like the Super Bowl for us here at Create Generational Wellness and Truthful Chat specifically because we love it. Yes, it's the month of love. Yes, the Super Bowl happens. Shout out to Usher, Terry, Raymond, and friends. Y'all did that. But most importantly, it is Black History Month. And we have been having a incredible series of conversations around Black history. So the theme of the month is living, as it has been for this entire month. And today's episode is Living Black History, the evolution of parenting. Okay. And like I said, we kind of like, we talk about this and we don't talk about this in the Black community. Like we all have like traumatic childhood stories of some form or fashion that we like laugh about, but then therapize later. It's like an interesting dynamic. And people end up having kids, but they didn't really assess their own parenting experience, except to be like, I'm not going to do that with my kids. And then they either do the exact same thing or the complete opposite. And we'll see how it goes from there. So anyway, parenting is a very interesting space that we're going to be exploring and talking about. If you have not checked out previous episodes this month, we did the evolution of love. We have done the evolution of food. We did the evolution of church last week, which was really, really good. It's a long one, but it was really, really good. And the technology was against us. And then today is the evolution of parenting. I think we kind of almost got an extra Thursday because it is a leap year. It is February 29th. So I think it's very serendipitous that we get to have a truthful chat about Black History Month on the very, very, very last day of Black History because we got an extra day. Okay, as we've said about all of these episodes, the Black experience does not start with the transatlantic slave trade. I know that the people are actively trying to convince you that Black life started when people were brought here in 1619 and change. That is a falsity. It is a lie. But also, how would you know that? Because no one's teaching it to you. Okay, we're not going to get into politics, but you know what it is. Anyway, so we always start with Africa. So usually the way these things go, we start with Africa. We visit the transatlantic slave trade because that is an important part of our history, particularly as African Americans. We usually go to like emancipation when Abe freed the slaves. That's what he's known for, but it's kind of not that. But we talk about that anyway. Post-emancipation, which is Jim Crow, which is the reign of terror, as it's affectionately known in our community. And then we usually do the Great Migration. And then we usually do civil rights era. And then we try to like fast forward into our current situation, give or take. That's like 80s, 90s, 2000s. Okay. So anyway, everything always starts in Africa. So in Africa, family and parenting is not this sort of like nuclear version of family that we're used to. That's a very Western, European, Eurocentric concept. An African concept is pretty much how we know family, which is we have our parents, They may or may not be together, but you have parents. But usually there is some form of extended family, which is a lot of what happened in Africa prior to the colonizers A, coming in, or B, taking us away from Africa. Either way you look at it, colonizers are involved. Okay. Um, so it's really not this like, it's just me, my mom, and my dad. It's like you got grandparents, you got aunties, you got uncles, you got kinfolk, which is kind of how we still are as a community. It's like maybe you had two active parents, maybe one parent was absent. Typically, people tend to be like, Black fathers were gone, but sometimes mothers are gone. It really just depends on the situation and what period you're talking about. We also talked about in the evolution of love, just if you want a greater scope and context about that, there has always been a, I don't want to say agenda. Agenda gets Illuminati-ish. Objective for keeping Black families separated, discombobulated, and dysfunctional, which we will talk about. But we really, really talked about it in terms of love and the Black family and why all that is beneficial to said powers that be. So if you really want like more of an in-depth discussion about that, go back to the first episode this month. So anyway, that allowed for a greater system of camaraderie, community, belonging, regardless of if you were the two people that created this life or not. All different ages, all different statuses, everybody had a role to play in the communal rearing of kids. So it didn't just feel like it's just us and no more. You know what I mean? It's like you have help. And so it's an extended family system that I think gives you a great sense of collective identity. You realize you're not just, it's not just you, you're a part of a whole, right? And then, you know, they had polygamy in Africa. They still have polygamy in Africa in some places. So that definitely, and it's not like the sister wives, you know, American culture will bastardize everything. But that was, you know, a lot of how lines were propagated, where people would have multiple. Oh, hold on, sorry. Give me 2 seconds. Oh, this is very important. Oh no. Hold on. Give me 2 seconds. It's trying to say my computer is dying, and I won't believe it. Oh, there we go. Okay. Whew. I was like, oh no, we're gonna get cut off. All right.
I heard the boop. You're good.
Act like that didn't happen. Anyway, so polygamy was a way to extend family lines, right? I guess kind of sort of protect the purity of, I'm sure, royal bloodlines, which is usually what that means. I mean, they tend to do a lot of inbreeding in Europe, but you know, it's all about the purity of the line. So anyway, people would sow their royal oats, come to America style. And again, that is reinforcing the cooperative nature of family, the extended nature of family, that you're not just doing this whole family thing by yourself. And it's the birth of sort of our relationship to social responsibility, support systems within the community, knowing that like everything don't just boil down to your parents. You know what I mean? Your grandmother could have like carte blanche, right? Like what granny says go. You and your siblings could have a whole little situation going on. So it's a lot of things.
You know what? I'm just thinking about this as you're talking about the polygamy thing. But I bet if we were able to take a poll, the majority of people, or a lot of people, would have half brothers, half sisters. You know what I mean? Like,
for sure.
Same dad, different mom, same dad, which is kind of a little bit polygamy without the marriage part. You know what I mean? Without the official
Yeah,
part.
without the marriage part. But yeah, I think that's the thing.
But I would venture to say 60 to 70% of African American people have.
I do.
That's my half brother. That's my half sister. That's my, you know, you got two. You got a half sister and half brother. For moms, both things. So it doesn't carry over exactly like polygamy, but that this is another part of my family that's over here, and we all kind of bring it in together. No matter if you're lucky, no matter how the children got here, they still become a part of the collective family and the parents.
Yeah, because I never say like this is my half sister. I'm like, I think when I was younger, because that was like the technical term, you know what I mean? But like those are still my siblings. Like that's just how we think of it, whether we have the same moms or not. Like it's not really the
And I
point. We
call them
all
my bonus children,
yeah, we all
so
still are blood related.
again, it's how it has evolved from quote unquote outside kids to these are my bonus kids, this is part of my family, and that's been part of an evolution too, I think.
And again, that was happening before colonization, right? That's just kind of like African, like that's just how Africans did family. You can feel however you want to feel about polygamy, but I think it translates, like you said, if this is the way that a lot of families are working, now people having outside kids. Now, granted, we know there's a whole other thing on top of that, right? Which we're getting ready to get into. But just saying outside of the colonizers' influence or messing around or slave breeding, et cetera, there is just something about we just do family muy grande. You know what I mean? Like we just everybody is family. Even if we talk about the diaspora or like cultural things that we have, right? Like as a culture, we're like, this is for the culture. Like we're all still one thing. So anyway, and then they also had extended family in Africa in that they had slaves. And I think this is where like the debate about like were we stolen or were we given away in slavery emerges. And honestly, it's both. It's like people were giving Africans, usually rival tribal folks that they captured or whatever in war and battle or whatever, giving them to the Europeans. But doing that because the slavery in Africa was completely different than what they would be doing in the North Americas. Even now today, like I forgot who I was talking to, but like people have house servants like right now that like live in the quarters with them if you know they balling enough. That are like extended members of the family that just live there. I think a really cool example, and maybe this is on the top of my mind because I've kind of been following Jeffrey Wright for the last 2 weeks. Anyway, in American Fiction, if you've seen that movie, highly recommend. Great. I loved it both times. I think it's like an instant classic for me. I loved it the first time, but I really, really loved it the second time. And in that family, and I wouldn't say they're like everybody's doing well. I don't know that I would say that they balling out of control, but everyone's doing well. But in that family, they have, I forgot the character's name, but it's a woman who lives at their house that has taken care of all the kids and helped their mother. And she's like, yeah, 4 years. Like she is an extended member of their family. And you know, without spoiling the movie, she ends up breaking that familiar bond for another bond. But they treat her like family, like she is a part of the family. And so in African enslavement or slavery, that's the thing, is like you are an extended member of the family. Now, how that breaks down into punishment or whatever, like I don't know about all that. But saying that to say that there were people that lived and worked the land in these environments, but that they were also considered part of the community. So you would probably have someone who was enslaved, possibly instructing the kids or looking out for them or whatever. So you have parents that are coming from a different place and space, which is interesting when you start to like look back at these things and then you realize how much still applies to us as a people of things that are just inherently African that nobody taught us, that we just continue to do, but that we don't necessarily have a like we can't put our finger on the pulse of it because no one's really teaching it to us. It's only when we start to like learn and discover and be like, oh, that's an inherently African thing that we do that, you know, we didn't even know was inherently African on purpose. But yeah, I think that's kind of cool.
Very cool. So then, of course, we get into slavery, and we all know all the stories of how we were treated and what it looked like, and the breaking up of the families and selling people.
Well, I'm not going to say we all know. I would hope that we would know. But if you don't, maybe watch the 12 Years a Slave, maybe watch some documentaries.
Pick a movie.
I just don't want to assume that everyone
knows. All right.
Watch the new schools. watch the old school rules. Just familiarize yourself.
Watch Roots, watch 12 Years a Slave, but you can find out that part of history they haven't taken out 100%. But in terms of parenting, during that time, Black parents often adopted a really strict parenting style out of necessity, number one. It was a survival strategy to prepare their kids for the harsh treatment that they were going to get as an enslaved person. It was a reflection of their own treatment. We have all had the debate about whippings and not whippings and how we perpetuated slave treatment by, Black people whipping their kids. But again, we're talking about the evolution of parenting. And that was a part of our history, that you got whipped.
And I also want to say, too, people have to keep in mind, as we were just talking about polygamy and extended families being like an African tradition in general. I think about the amount of people that were raising other people's kids. And we talked about this also in the Love episode about how people were still getting married, but also the states weren't acknowledging slave marriages. So that was a thing, or people would be sold off, or people's parents could be killed, or sold to another plantation, and they tell you they're coming back, but they might not. So you may literally have a kid that's like 5 or 6 on a plantation with no parents, also under the threat of severe brutality. So a lot of people just ended up, or their mom would die or whatever from heat exhaustion, or I don't know, pick a thing. You know what I mean? Like the mortality rate is super high. So a lot of people are actually ending up rearing other people's kids under this sort of very, very strict, because we're trying to keep you alive at all costs. Not that we have any control over that, but we're going to do what we can to try to do that, while also still probably finding time to actually let you be a kid. You know what I mean? Too, with whatever that looks like in that.
So hard. So hard. And in the process of doing that, you're trying to teach your child how to survive. You're trying to teach them, no matter how angry we all say, I couldn't have been a slave, I couldn't this, that, and the other, but you had to learn that as part of survival. And as a Black parent, you had to figure out how to teach that as part of survival, of master gonna kill you, or do this or do that, and take away so much of the natural inclination of what a child could be and should be, right? So it involved that harsh treatment, but it also involved a lot of communication between mothers and daughters and sons and whatever. You had to teach them how to be resilient, how to stay alive, how to outthink the white folk, as my grandfather called it, how to do all these things in order to survive and to carry hope and to keep the family going. Even though everything in society was trying to erase that bond, erase who you are, erase your identity, all of that was going on. But there had to be, I don't care what they try to tell you, there had to be some sort of magnificent parenting going on that we survived. My brother and I were talking about this the other night. We were like, as a race of people, anybody that's still here, African American, your family was surviving Middle Passage, surviving slavery, surviving Jim Crow. You are a survivor, as Destiny's Child would say, and somebody taught you how to survive. So there were plenty of,
Sorry, just before you move from the communication piece, because when I saw that in the notes, specifically that you put mothers and daughters, that also struck me, because there was the threat of sexual violence all the time. And not to say that boys weren't being sexually abused and violated, and men weren't being sexually abused and violated. But I think about, like, how do you prepare a child, really at any age, right, for that, but to be like, at any point in time, your body will be violated, especially for girls. Like, that was pretty much like a standard thing. And then, to know that your mother, your grandmother, your whoever could be violated at any time, and how to mentally prepare somebody for that. It was like, when I saw mothers and daughters, I was like, that's a very specific type of communication that needs to be had. and like nothing that you could really do about it, right? It's like, what are those conversations? So yeah, just kind of really thinking about the realities of the things our ancestors like really had to suffer and think through and survive through. And I think we talk about the show all the time, but I think one of the greatest examples sort of all of those elements is Underground.
Underground. I was thinking about it too.
Miss Ernestine, played by the incredible Journey Smollett, plays Rosalie. I forgot the baby's name that plays the younger brother. But they go into all that. It's a whole episode that's just about the kids trying to survive in the day of slavery. And also being in proximity to white kids too, who actually could be your brothers and sisters, right? So they get to
back to the polygamy,
jump around and play and do all that or whatever. And so, you know, you may or may not know if this is your blood relative or not, but if you see that kind of freedom to be a kid in front of you, and you might have a taste of it because a lot of those kids sometimes were like the slave master's children's playmates, right? Like that kind of thing, which your playmate is also your brother or sister. It's weird. But anyway, I can imagine as a kid in proximity to that level of freedom that you're experiencing for a couple hours a day. And then you might sleep in a big house, you might not. So you might have to go back to, you know, the slave quarters and the cabins or whatever, and be with your parents who are extra strict. And so I'm sure they felt the dichotomy or the frustration or the anger. And now it just looks like your parents are mean or rude or cruel or they hate you, when it's really like there's a whole level of stuff that's going on that you're not aware of. And I'm not trying to put all that on you. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not trying to put all that on you. And then the threat of violence is around
hundreds of years. Yeah.
Right. But anyway, go ahead.
How many challenges that affected families and parenting during slavery? You know, we talked about separation anxiety, the emotional trauma. You want to be marching for reproductive rights now and all that, but there were no reproductive rights for us in slavery. You know, whoever could take you, have you sexually, take your baby, do whatever they wanted to do with it after it even came into this world. So it's crazy. Then, like Jess mentioned, you had all the unions that you were together with this person, but it wasn't recognized legally. It wasn't sanctioned. You couldn't legally marry. So you're trying to figure out, like you said, looking at what's going on in the big house and trying to see how does that relate to where you live and where you are and the structure of families that you can have. And then in the South, you know, there were so many conditions that were brutal that just mentioned also the mortality rate. You got people, you know, low fertility because of how they're working and being treated and in the fields all the time, and then the high mortality. So again, these are all things that affected the ability to parent, to have a cohesive family union. And so again, the men getting sold off, the woman's there with the children, hopefully, until the children get old enough to be sold off. And so the structure of that was highly matriarchal. Women often led the household, and that has been an influence and by default, not by choice. We still ain't trying to do all that half the time, but it's continued into Black families through the statistics and through the dynamics of the way, you know, it started. You always have to go back to how it started to figure out how you can get out of it, right? After the Civil War and during the Reconstruction era, then African Americans tried to find those family members who had been displaced and they didn't know where they were. They would place ads in newspapers. They would utilize churches and networks trying to reconnect and rebuild this family unit. Because as we still are, we're trying to heal the wounds of the past and to create generational wellness from the different traumas and things that we've gone through. And the desire to put families back together was a really, really driving force after slavery, during Jim Crow and all that.
Yeah, because I feel like family, the need and the desire for family is very human, right? So it's like even a condition where you're trying to dehumanize people who are clearly human. They're still doing human things. You know what I mean? That's just, and animals do it too. I get it. I mean, it's like they have families too, but like, that semblance of some sort of structure, some sort of normalcy, some sort of place to belong in a place that completely makes you feel like you never belong, right? Is very human. So shout out to our ancestors that endured all of that. Every time I always think of something new that I never thought about before about how they were able to survive that period. And literally that everything is about survival. It's not like they weren't people, they didn't have feelings and emotions and desires or whatever, but when everything about you is controlled by someone else, what does that look like in a day-to-day context? So anywho,
listen, if resilience was a person, it would be our ancestors. That's just all it is to it.
Pretty much. So as we move on to the Great Migration, this of course has a, profound effect on the family unit, right? Because you are literally like taking people from what they've always known and moving them away from it. Okay. So people had grown up in the South their whole life. They knew how the South operated. They knew what was going on. Now you are removing everyone from those extended families. I mean, if you're talking about somebody who was never raised by their parents and they were raised by some woman that took them in, and this is post emancipation, and they all decide they're going to travel together, then that's the family unit that's going, right? But of course, we know that the North has its own challenges. And so there's a lot of like moving parts in this, and that it's very, very new, right? Because people are leaving their homes, they're seeking a better life. This is 6 million people who had a very set way of living for a very long time that are now disrupting everything in search of something better. So I think we talked about this in the love episode, but pretty much after the Emancipation Proclamation and Jim Crow and all of that, the U.S. government, the white government, same thing. The U.S. government was like, we know we did this to y'all, but we're not going to be responsible for y'all, so y'all got to figure it out, right? So we talked about the amount of pressure that was put on Black men, particularly when it came to understanding the family structure as it is dictated by Eurocentric standards, and that Black men are now
of which they were never able to do.
Of course, Black men are the head of the household. You take care of your wife and kids, or whatever y'all family structures are that aren't as good as ours. Blah blah blah. So anyway, people are taking whatever set family structures they have, moving up north. But again, this is 6 million people that the U.S. government has not allotted for, okay, in any way, shape, or form. You weren't supposed to get away. The structure that was is a structure that's supposed to be to this day. As you can see, they're eager to regress. They're always eager to go back to that. That's the way they think that it was supposed to be. So anyway, you have a housing problem, right? Wasn't nobody building those spots for these people to be at. They just decided, hey, we going to Chicago, you know what I mean? And pull up. And it wasn't like Chicago was like, oh, all of these Negroes are coming for the South. Let's build them a place to live. They was like, nah, they just pulled up, right? So
they're like Ron DeSantis. They're trying to send them somewhere else.
So you have people living in very cramped, often unsanitary conditions, which I'm sure is not that far-fetched from slavery or Jim Crow or how they was living anyway. You know what I mean? And I think there's like a bamboozlement element, because people could have had, their own land there, but sharecropping was clearly trash. So, they're going up north hoping that there's going to be that 40 acres, you know what I'm saying, that they were supposed to have that never happened. Like some magical grand place in the north where like Black people could just live all their greatest dreams. And obviously they ended up living in tenements and very, very poor rundown conditions, which were usually where a lot of the white immigrants were living when they first got here, before they decided that they was going to come up and use whiteness to their advantage. Search for employment. Okay. Everybody is competing for the same jobs, right? And good paying jobs. And then of course,
Black people in the 30s.
With all these skills, with all these amazing skill sets that you have, that you've acquired by force. that you're probably more qualified. But again, whiteness is a tool of the Americas. So you're Black, you're not, I don't care what kind of skill set you have. They're not going to hire you over the Jewish, Italian, pick a thing, just because they're white, not because they're qualified, but just because they're white. So I think that when we start getting into like European versus Black debates, it's like, y'all do know though that like, even in those times, not saying that you didn't have shade and hard times as the Irish and whatever when you got here, because white people going white. But what you could do was assimilate. You could decide, maybe I'm not going to use my Jewish name. Maybe I'm not going to use my Irish name. Maybe I'm going to become somebody else. This is unassimilatable, okay? People have tried, though. They've definitely tried. So anyway, you have that battle going on in the North, right? Basic, like we said, general racism. Just, you're Black, we don't like you, you don't deserve to be here, which I think people didn't think was a thing in the North, but it was. Like, not for everybody, but for some people. And then, you know, you got a different kind of protection, but it's kind of the same. It's not like if white people, white immigrant groups, right, who are trying to come up on this whole whiteness is the thing in America,
American
like
dream.
If the thing is to beat up on Black people, that's what we're gonna do. So now it's like some of the same things you was facing in the South, you facing in the North in terms of discrimination. We don't want to hire you. We don't like y'all. We
and you don't have the support system that you had in the North. That you used to have in the South. You knew how to get around Mr. Charlie down South, but this Mr. Charlie up North is a horse of
two different things.
Color.
Different things. And then, you know, you start to see sort of the, I don't know if I want to call it the breakdown of the family, but tension in the family, right? It's like if a Black man came up here with a lot of feasible skills, clear, great work ethic, but is unable to find employment, that is going to put a strain on the family, particularly if you're trying to live a traditional Christian existence. With the man as the head of the household, he can't provide, so that's the thing. Not by any of his own faults. Remember, the U.S. government, like, figure it out, nigga. But but somebody got to work, right? So now you have the dynamic of Black women who also have a certain set of skills from the South, right? And we all know most white people, they love slavery, okay? Even in the North. You're going to take care, you're going to watch my kids for me. Oh my God, this is great. So now you have this whole class of Black women who are now being domestics and making the most money and becoming the breadwinners and whatever, because your husband might not be able to get that job at the steel mill or the construction site or whatever the thing is,
right? Or wherever.
So now you're making all of the money. So it's easier. That is a change in household dynamics. And then, you know, there's the activism piece of it, right? How do you teach your kids to survive in the North? It's kind of it's different than the South, but it's also very much the same as the South. So you got to like adopt a whole set of new social norms and mores around how do you survive in the North, and how do you kind of burst your kids' bubble as your bubble is being burst, to be like, well, we thought this was going to be different, but it looks like more of the same. You know what I'm saying? So in a lot of ways, a lot of those survival skills they learned down South actually help them in the North as well. And especially, you know, as we're in segregated schools and that whole situation, it's like, yeah, a lot of those same survival tactics you got to keep up. That is until we get to the civil rights era, right? Where everybody just kind of decided, is y'all going to do what y'all said y'all was going to do, or is you not? You know what I'm saying? So now there is this push for, you know, they kept talking about separate but equal, but we all know that's not the case. Now they on equal air quotes, but separate. That's actually the inverse of what we're currently experiencing.
Listen, what it was separate, and Black people's version was better. It should have been separate and better, which again, when you think about how it's always gone, you know, it's very difficult for the white culture. I'm not talking about white people in particular, but
culture. White supremacy specifically.
See Black people prospering.
Doing better than them.
Doing better than they are doing. And so there's always going to be a push to stop that. There's going to be a burning. There's going to be a Tulsa. There's going to be a Rosewood. There's going to be whatever it is. They're going to
kill you.
Going to be something.
We're going to lynch you.
That says you cannot be better than we are. And we bought into it for a little while. You know what I mean? I always say integration may be one of the worst things that ever happened to Black people, really, because I'm getting ahead of myself, but from going to an integrated school versus going to a Black school, I disappeared when I went to the white school. Whereas at the Black school, I was celebrated, I was seen, I was heard, I was encouraged. When I started going to white school, they wouldn't call on you. They wouldn't ask you anything. You could be in the front raising your hand, knowing all the answers. And they just weren't, you were not seen. So,
and you know how important it is for me. Yeah, you know how it is and how important it is in the child's development, particularly in a scholastic environment, that they be seeing knowledge. You know what I mean? Like you're supposed to be trying to advance these people to be the best that they can be as your students, but
and then segregation. You're seeing your parents make all these sacrifices for you to go to these integrated schools and
institutions.
So you don't want to come home and say
and complain.
I hate it there. They treat me bad, and you don't even really know 100% what to articulate what you're feeling. How to articulate, what you're feeling. But again, talking about parenting, here are these parents busting their butts. I remember my mom getting up, driving us 45 minutes out to the white school and this, that, and the other, and blah, blah, blah. And we all hated it, but this is what we were supposed to do to get, a good education. And so again, that parenting thing, which we're going to talk about in a minute, in terms of your child's education, there's a whole different thing that goes along with watching how you parent a Black kid in a white environment. That's a whole nother open show, but back to you.
But I mean, it is, this is the push and pull of that era. It's the way that we revere it and honor it and respect everybody that was like fighting for what they at the time thought would actually be equality and a better opportunity, right? So I think Black people thought education was the way at that time. They was like, oh, we just got to be smarter. That's fine. So this is where, you see the push of desegregation, right? Particularly in schools, Brown versus Board of Education, like clearly Black children were in subpar schooling conditions, but we know how to make it do what it do, period. Like, when have we not been given subpar conditions in this country? Right. So we gonna make it work. I mean, that's cool. Y'all got air conditioning and the right books and all of that. But like, we gonna figure out how to make it work, which is what they were doing in segregated schools. Now all of a sudden it's this push for desegregation. And then you have all these kids getting bussed in, going to white environments, white schools, but still with we're better than them, right? All your white teachers, all your white students, all your white teachers, all your white students, all the people are being like, we're better than them, right? So you kind of just become invisible in these environments. You have desegregation of the military under President Truman at this time, right? Everybody's fighting and dying and spilling blood, right? So they should be equal, right? In terms of the military. There's a lot we could get into about that, but that's that. Activism and representation, right? So now you have certain groups of people. I think we talked about this maybe, I don't remember what episode, but one of the past episodes about how everybody, in the church episode, everybody wasn't involved in the civil rights movement because they had a certain level of economic stability that they wasn't trying to lose by stirring up trouble, right? But on the flip side, you had a whole bunch of people that was participating in civil unrest, and it was usually young people to the detriment of their parents. Of course, obviously there was older people doing the bus boycotts and the freedom rides, but it was kids integrating Little Rock, right? High school You got Ruby Bridges during this era. You got people from all different sectors and ages fighting the power, if you will, and really making it be known and heard, right, that we are here, we're not going anywhere, we're looking for equality, and you're gonna hear us, okay? And that goes for all gamuts of ages, but I can imagine if you're a parent of a kid who is marching and protesting, right, and you're afraid for their physical safety, that has, as we've been talking about, a lot of it makes your parenting thing go off, especially in Black America, of like, how can I keep my kids safe? You know what I mean? So I could understand the trepidation about that, but kids was getting locked up, kids going to prison, kids were getting hosed, right? Kids were, and adults, marching for the right to vote, right? So we know the Voting Rights Act eventually gets passed now without a lot of compulsion and conniption and everything in between, because everybody wasn't really 100% on the same page about that, obviously. So you have children, teenagers, young adults, not being bystanders, especially in a era with a Dr. King, and eventually it'll come on Malcolm X. It's like everybody wants to get involved and making sure that we are accounted for in the struggle for what we feel is civil rights. Now, everybody sort of got sold a Willy Wonka golden ticket on that. It's not 100% of what it seems like on the other side, but at that point, that's what everybody thought, right? There was definitely a push for activism, whether people were celebrating it or trying to quench and deter you from it, just as a parent, to keep you safe. So that also, safe. I'm sure, caused a lot of tension. Huh? What'd you say?
No, I said just keep you safe. Keep you safe.
Yeah, really, really, just to keep you safe. So I'm sure that caused a lot of tension between parents and children who were like, you want to keep me safe, and yet things are not changing, right? So like, how much of this survivalist ideology that y'all have, like, yes, it's kept us safe, but we still are living in subpar conditions. I'm experiencing subpar things. I'm not being treated as a human. And especially, I think, like, you don't know what you don't know till you know it. And I think sometimes, again, where we talked about this in slavery, but I think also in desegregation, when you are interacting with white kids and you seeing the way that they live versus the way that you live, there's a certain level of freedom that you're seeing, that you're like, well, how do I get to that? And they're like, no, you can't have that. And you'd be like, but why? Because we're all in the same school, learning the same things, doing the same stuff. But they're going to keep the inferiority jacket on you so that can pump up their superiority, right? And I think a lot of probably Black kids in that generation, their parents have got used to that inferiority jacket. And here their kids come talking about, but we ain't got to be wearing this though. Like, Dr. King says we don't have to wear it. Ralph Abernathy says we don't have to wear it. Malcolm says we got to. Medgar Evers said we don't got to wear it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, now you have all these examples of people who are deciding to throw off the inferiority jacket, and a whole bunch of parents that are like, no, you know what I mean? Which I'm sure could be scary. And then again, like we was talking about, there is the resurgent, this idea that education is the way out, right? So this is everybody really killing it in the scholastic environment, despite the obstacles, issues, and situations, because you can't. If the narrative had been that y'all wasn't smart enough to go to school with us, and then they start going to school with y'all, and then you start shining, yeah. All of this winning, like, that's problematic. Like, you can't keep that psychological mind game going, because I'm getting more A's than you. I'm playing basketball and killing it in the classroom. Like, I'm doing all the things.
And that's why they wouldn't call on you, because your answer would show up the inferiority on the other side. So now you about to switch this jacket over to the other side. Which is, I'm not wearing the jacket. You got to wear the jacket, and right. We still fight now.
Which is mind blowing. And I was actually watching, I think Shonda Rhimes posted this, but it was like the very first time we ever met Papa Pope on Scandal, and it was Joe Morton's like that explosive scene. Because I think up until then we didn't know anything about Olivia's family. Like we were like, where does this black woman come from? But he was reading her the riot act about sleeping with Fitz, and you don't open your legs for power and this, that, and the third. And I always taught you we got to be what? And she like completely turns into a little girl. She's like twice as good to get half as much. You know what I mean? Like this is the era that was born in.
That was black.
You gotta be twice as good to get half as much. And even when you twice as good, they still gonna play you, right? And so there's a lot of, I imagine for kids, just a level of confusion, right? About inferiority versus superiority, safety versus when do we get unsafe in order to push the envelope forward, right? And then you also got to deal with but there still are layers of inferiority complex there. So, if we talk about psychological discrimination, I think they ran the Clark-Doll test, which I'm sure you can find this on YouTube, but it was a series of these tests that I don't remember who did it, but just Google it. But anyway, they would show black kids, black doll and a white doll, and be like, which one do you think is smarter? Which one do you think is prettier? Which one do you think is going to be more successful in life? Which one do you think? And of course, all the black kids were pointing to the white dolls, right? So that's still sort of a thing that we're fighting today, right? In terms of whiteness seems to equate with what's better, what's richer, what's prettier, what's that. It's still that superiority ideology that is held in high regard. Now, you got to unbleach your brain. I will say that. But that is that is a lifelong process. You know what I mean? Like you don't think those things out of nowhere. That did not come out of a vacuum. It is very strategic. It is highly planned. Even, now we got plenty of black kids that live in where we live, which is called the Valley. LA is very LA, right? That is very black, south of the 10. But sometimes you deal with subpar school conditions. You deal with food inequities. Sorry, we don't call them deserts anymore. All the things that particularly tend to hold black communities back. There's a little bit more opportunity in the Valley, right? But there's also a lot more racism. And we live in the San Fernando Valley. If you go out to Simi Valley, it's crazy. And you trying to raise healthy, strong, independent, forward-thinking, smart black kids amongst some people that still think that they're superior. And people who are not even white that still think they're superior to your black. So there's all those kind of things that we're still really dealing with and delving through as a people that you can see has layers on layers on layers on layers of complication. So there's a reason that black parenting is just not a one size fits all jacket. There's a lot of things. And again, I say it every week, white supremacy transforms and shapeshifts better than Optimus Prime. Okay. So even if you got one layer of the thing figured out as a parent, they're going to have you shape-shifting into something else. So as you try to figure it out, and you're like, dang, how am I going to tell my kid? They done switch the rules on us again. They done change it up again. Now I got to try to figure out how to navigate it myself and then tell my kid to do it too. So
much so in the Valley, there's a Facebook group called Black in the Valley. Then
Black in the Valley.
My niece started another Facebook group called Parents of Black Children. It's a real thing. It still is. And
you got to maintain your black identity in the midst of whiteness. And what does that look like?
And you have to fight for it. So, then we start getting to the 60s. The schools are integrated, start shifting the idea of what black families look like, period. I was born in the 50s. So all the TV sitcoms and offering a look into how white families were operating. Then again, now we start to adjust that and equate that with who we are. So we start to get our Ebony magazines and our Jets, where we see an upwardly mobile lifestyle, middle-class values starting to come out. And, as we try to, figure out where we fit and what that looks like. Now, now here comes this study in the 60s by psychologist Diana Baumrein, I think is how you pronounce her name. And it initially was about 3 different parenting styles, but it went everywhere. Black communities, white communities, whatever, were all these assessments of it. And they're basically 3 different types. And then they added a 4th one, which was authoritarian, authoritative, and permissive. So this got to be the rage in the 60s, just like Dr. Spock, how do you raise your child or whatever. And then a 4th style was added in the 80s that was called the neglectful parent. So I'm going to run through these real quick.
There's a reason for that. There's a reason for neglectful parent, but we'll get there.
Yeah. So to get a picture of the authoritarian parent, think of a typical 1950s Leave It to Beaver kind of family. The father goes off to work, my 3 sons, whatever. The mother's at home. She's a stay-at-home mom. There are predictable rules. Everybody knows what they are. You get grounded if you do something that's not right. And you start to understand these parents are conservative. They are rule followers. They want control. They want a sense of this is how we do our lives. And, our hedges are perfectly manicured and our grass. Cookie cutter. So there are strict rules for child conduct. And an authoritarian parent only sees black and white. So there's a lot of judgment, a lot of evaluation. A child is either good or bad, well-behaved or naughty. I'm dating myself, but Dennis the Menace, he was like the classic TV show where Dennis was just bad all the time, just bad. So children are looked at with a critical eye. And sometimes they're even perceived as a threat to the order that's supposed to be in the house and must be kept down. So you don't explain it to the child. This is, we've all had children seen, now heard, blah, 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 all these things that now become a part of our culture on top of what we already had as our culture with trying to protect our children, whatever. So this can, of course, get to be really, really oppressive for a child. And so, they're expected to behave as adults, even though they're not, which is why we be seeing Black kids get shot, because they're being perceived as an adult when they're really kids. We can go down that whole train, but this is, kids learn, if I don't behave, I'm going to get punished.
Wait.
And so they tend to willingly obey.
Wait, say that again, because you broke up a little bit.
Children learn that if I don't behave, I'm going to get punished. So the idea is not
when you say that, right? But granted, when you say that, like even when you're talking about this type of parenting style, which I assume at that time was the pervasive, parenting style, because it's like you got to put all this, like you are putting blackness and proximity to whiteness. You are feeding Black kids these white images, but like you got to think about a Dennis the Menace is not possible as a Black boy. That's not a thing. He is going to get shot, probably. You know what I'm saying? Like there's no world in which a Black boy could be that bad and that are really like, oh, Dennis, you're just so, oh God, you're so hilarious week after week after week, right? So you're like almost poisoning a Black child's mind with the fantasy of that, which I don't know why anybody would want to imagine being as unruly and bad as that child was. Because just collectively, race aside, we'd be like, Dennis is bad. But he's able to slide on it because of a certain level of whiteness. And he don't really have no authoritarian parents, because they would have nipped that in the bud by then. But just to be able to have that as an imaginative thing for a Black kid is ridiculous. But go ahead.
And so these kids kind of, they have a difficult time handling frustration, and they're prone to lower self-esteem, anxiety, and depression. So that's your authoritarian kind of parent. Now you move into permissive parenting, and this is called highly indulgent. And this is when you want to be your kid's friend, and they can talk to you any kind of way and do whatever you want to do. The child behaves unruly in the grocery store or whatever. We've all seen that as a Black parent, you'd be like, I'm about to snatch it. You know what I'm saying? And your kids know. I remember Jessica was in high school and, again, went to predominantly white high school and hearing some of her friends talk to people and whatever. And she and her Black friends would be like, oh, no, I got a Black mama. I can't, that level of permissiveness was not permitted. You want to talk to the child. You want to use reason and bribes to get them to do whatever you want to do. They these type of parents value autonomy of the individual. The word is seen as a free place, filled with opportunities. You can do what you want. You can, you're accepted. It's that you.
Hold on. Sorry. Take that again. It keeps like clipping out or something.
Okay.
Well, go ahead. Just read that. Just
permissive parents feel like the child is autonomous of the individual. They're not a child. They're an individual. So you have to let them be who they are. The world is seen as a free place. You have opportunities that are just waiting to be seized. Go forth, be who you want to be, right? And traditional child discipline and rigid rules of conduct are seen as restrictive of the child's natural development and freedom and independent thinking. Again, this comes out, we're just fresh in civil rights still, really. And so for a Black child to have all these expectations and, you know, you can do whatever you want or whatever is not realistic because of the country that we live in. So as a parent, you got to figure out, okay, as much as I would like that for my child, let's try to figure out how we can maneuver this together. So that,
and real quick, because I can hear the devil's advocates being like, but all those are wonderful things. Like, why wouldn't you want that for your kid? Like, why they should be wanting to be whoever they want to be. You should never, like the Montessori school approach, you should never tell, like, the world is their oyster. I'm like, yes, in theory of all equality of humanness and greatness, yes, but isms, okay? Racism, sexism, xenophobiaism. I'm like, pick a thing. If y'all wouldn't create these isms, then maybe that could be a thing. So that's all we're saying. We're not saying that those are not good things. Those are not things that kids, those are not things that kids should have. Everybody will want these things for their kids. But the reality of them actually happening in systems, in countries, and places where these sort of caste systems are in place, well, not sort of, these caste systems are in place, you are limited now into what your kid can and can't have, can and can't do, can and can't be, because if we're just talking about survival, now if you don't care, have at it. Let them be out here doing the things. But as a child of color, growing up doing all that, they're going to run into some roadblocks and some things that I've watched kids whose parents haven't raised them.
Could be a life or death situation.
Right. Or they don't understand. Like, there's just so many things culturally that they just don't understand of, like, how are you, like, they're going to hit a wall at some point. And if you haven't, as a parent, prepared them to hit the wall, they're going to be very devastated, emotionally messed up, super confused. Because as a parent, you didn't prepare them for the realities. It's not like you don't want them to dream big and go and do stuff, but the reality is some of these things are going to happen and they have to be prepared for that. But continue. What is the next style?
So traditionally they said those kids raised under that have high self-esteem, low levels of depression, high social skills. Also very entitled. You know, you see kids that are raised like that they believe that they can, again, do and say whatever they want. So this study then says that the ideal parenting style is the authoritative parenting style, which kind of puts the two of them together. It's a middle ground. You take the best from the authoritarian and the control part, and the best from the permissive parenting. And even though this research is over 50 years old, many people still see this as the ideal form of parenting. Control is achieved by using firm and fair reasoning, not necessarily punishment or rules that you can and can't do, but more openly talking to your kid and having them hopefully come to the decision that this is the best way to go. My parents have put these parameters in place. I could go outside of them, but reasonably and logically, that is not what makes the most sense. So they believe in control. They believe in having a high standard of behavior. The difference is they're not keeping their kids down. They're exposing them and having dialogue and conversations about it to help kids make the right decision. This is kind of how I tried to raise you. And I can remember when you were little, 2, 3, whatever, we would have full-on conversations about why that's not a good idea. And if this happens, if you do this, then this could happen or that can happen. And we had those conversations, you know, all throughout your childhood up into your teenage years. You know, we tell that story about when you were 13 and you were like, okay, I'm about to start making your life miserable. And the conversation was, you could, or we could have a good time, you know? And so what you're hoping for your child is they'll be assertive, but not intrusive. You want to discipline, but it's supportive rather than punitive. It's more like, okay, this is what could happen. This is the better option. You're a reasonable person. I'm going to keep talking to you about this so that hopefully you'll understand what is the better decision. Not necessarily right, wrong, this, that, and the other, but this is what better decision for this situation. So you balance out the child's autonomy, you give them a sense of self-control, discipline, but there's order and praise and positive attention that hopefully changes the way your child thinks about themselves, how they interact with the world. And you want your child to understand their own feelings, think of ways to solve problems. And hopefully that's the way we live our adult lives. And so that's what you're trying to show. TV wise, you know, whatever you think about Bill Cosby, the Cosby Show represented kind of like this authoritative family where there were rules, whatever, but there was also conversations and that helped the children make the best decision. And then, of course, the neglectful parent style is, you know, this involves parents that are not interactive at all. They don't care what you do. They're not talking to you. They're distant. They're detached. They're gone. They may be very wealthy and live lives, and their kids are in boarding school and they're separate from their, just all the things that would be like you have no contact or no input or no emotional involvement with your child. And so these kids really have low self-esteem. They feel unimportant and have a lot of challenges. And of course, you know, America would have you to believe that the majority of Black families are like this, but they're not. And so the dynamics of how you parent can go all the different ways. But you can also see how our history, along with socioeconomic differences, can have an impact on which style of this parenting you're able to do. If you're in a family, you want to say something.
No, I said, which is exactly what I was going to say about the neglectful parenting style around the 80s. I said, what kind of, first of all, most people, like a latchkey kid is a thing because people's parents were working. It wasn't like they wasn't trying to be with their kids. They was working to keep the lights on and give people food. Also, the U.S. government put crack in the system. So a lot of people was gone because they were strung out on drugs. It's not like they didn't want to be parents. If you watch the Crack in the System documentary on Netflix, really good. Heartbreaking though, because they talk about, which I thought was very smart about that documentary, about the generations of kids that didn't have their mothers because their mothers were strung out. Or they would be like semi-functioning, like they would be doing enough to like be home sometimes, but then they would just leave work like haphazardly and go get a fix and then come back. Like they were just talking about the like level of motherlessness that happened, but it wasn't like just because they didn't give a damn. It was like they were strung out. Now, you know, all of a sudden we have an opioid crisis and everybody want to care and be making Academy nominated movies about how their child is so strung out on the drugs and we need to help them. But y'all was not keeping that same energy when whole generations of people were being destroyed because y'all decided to put crack out there, overwork people, and have people living in chaos, really. So again, I think to your point of I resent that neglectful thing. And again, it looks different in socioeconomic. So sometimes it's rich.
There was crack and there was cocaine. The ultimate outcome was different.
Right.
It's just maybe you could afford to hire a nanny to be with your kid while you were spread out.
Right. And somebody to be there with your kid, whereas that's not always the option. So I was just like, are they serious? Like, I was like, get to that part so I can talk about the history and where we are at the time and as a people really encapsulates why people start describing things in particular ways, but they tend to leave out the stuff I just mentioned in order to just be like, well, y'all are just bad parents. Like, nah, bro, that's not what we are. What we are is oppressed. What we are is trying to survive and struggling because you just keep putting obstacle after obstacle in our way.
Yeah.
So
an authoritarian parenting style sometimes is just a response to stress and limited resources. Like, this got to be like this because I'm going to be gone and you got to be safe. It's always about safety. You know, at the end of the day, if you're...
Or I'm just trying to keep you alive because there was, you know, people had choppers in the street. People, again, all the crack era is all economics, right? It's again the proximity to whiteness to be like, well, y'all are living the American dream and I want it too. And if this how I'm gonna get it, this how I'm gonna get it. Where we have trap music and you know what I mean, all of that culture comes out of that era of where people were really just trying to make money to survive, make money to have some form of the American dream. Because in the 80s, all of y'all was, you know, doing cocaine in the bathroom, but also making millions of billions of dollars of trade. You know what I'm saying? Like at trading and doing all these things. So black people was like, well, right. People of color was like, well, we got to get ours too. So this is how we going to get it. So I'm like, don't infect the water and then be mad that the water is infected and how people are responding. I'm like, you did this. So take responsibility.
So yeah, it's resources, it's money, it's finances. You know, you got financial flexibility, you got a higher income, you have greater access to education and opportunities. So now you get a higher level of as these people matriculate, hopefully now you have parents who have higher educational levels, and then that gives them improved communication, problem solving skills, which you need those to be an effective parent. So once we start getting into how, I guess I'm talking about how we shift from this authoritarian to a more authoritative style as Black people, we start to, you know, go more to school, more higher education, this, that,
therapy,
mobile, and therapy, money, whatever. But now we're starting to pay more attention to child development and to set appropriate expectations for behavior and achievements, and to recognize the trauma, like you said, the therapy that we've gone through that may be playing a role into the way that we parent, and not having to say, well, I've always done it this way and this is the way my grandmama did it. But why? And your grandmama might have been wrong. And so if you're trying to get to a place of generational wellness, your grandparent might have been doing that to keep you alive, but it may not have been the best way for them to be a parent. And so one of the things that
be a parent, be a parent for you, because remember, we're not even talking about this whole thing about we're humans and we're complex and we're this. We was considered 3/5 a person. You done heard half the history we done gone through, right? So we're not saying your granny is wrong and that she was wrong for not seeing all of you. It was like, no, at that time she was trying to keep you alive. She did the right thing for that. But as you are matriculating and going on and rearing and caring for other people, you have an obligation to not just make survival, I think, the primary thing. There are so many other resources, so many other tools, so many of the things that we've been talking about. It's like people think that when people say that, like, we're trying to comfort your family. And we're like, we're not trying to comfort your family. What we're trying to do is honor what they did in light of where they were, where we were as a people in history at that time. Like, ain't nobody gonna shade you for that. We wouldn't be here without that. So kudos, but there's also more, right? So create generational wellness is about getting to the more part of it.
So even
so
if
hopefully,
where are you going?
I was going to say we haven't depressed you, but we were going to start to talk very quickly about solutions.
Even with the socioeconomic improvement of the last 100 years, we recognize that racism still exists. It impacts the way we are perceived, the way our children are perceived, and the way we have to parent still has a lot to do with race, unfortunately. So as a Black parent, we're still aware of these biased expectations. We still have to be vigilant about these things. I'm here in Texas. I've been here for a couple of months. There's been this whole trial for this young man named Daryl George about the Crown Act, because his locks below. Do you know this? His locks, if he takes them out, go below the top of his t-shirt, the top. And so in Texas, I guess there's a law that says your locks cannot be longer than that. Now, mind you, he wears them twisted up in a crown when he goes to school. So they're never out. They're always braided and twisted up. But the judge said that he had violated the Crown Act. And he's been expelled for the last, I think they said 6 or 8 months of school. And so because of
now you're going to be talking about he's behind
2024. Okay. So these negative forces are still there. They can lead to adverse effects for your kids, as you can imagine. So as a parent, you got to be aware of all those other things, authoritarian, authoritative, permissive, where you fall on that scale. But then you also have to be vigilant to have a buffer against the bias. And how do you fight that as a parent? But you have to be aware that you have to fight it. You can't just let it go, because that's not teaching your child the reality of bias and equipping them with the tools to fight against it. So it doesn't stop, I guess, is that what I'm trying to say. But there are ways, like you said, holding your child to academic standards, having conversations about these crazy things that are happening and let them vocalize to you how they feel about it, getting therapy if that's necessary to help your child be fully engaged and fully present and full of pride for who they are as an African American. That's all part of your parenting. It's not just, did they do their homework? Did they, get an A on the test or whatever? There's a whole nother level that you have to do that instills that pride. I can remember when Jessica was in elementary school, probably heard us tell this story. It was Black History Month. They wanted all the kids to come dressed. It wasn't even Black history. It was American history or something. I don't know what it was, but the project was come dressed as somebody from American history. So I sent her dressed as Sally Hemings, and she looked beautiful. She had on a lace dress, feathers in her hair, like she was in Paris, because that's where Thomas Jefferson took her and hung out with her.
The original getting flued out.
The original getting flued out. But when she went to that little white school in Burbank, dressed as Sally Hemings, everybody wanted to know, oh, who are you? I'm like, no, we are not going as Harriet. We are not going as Sojourner, as much as they contributed. But I want y'all to know this is also a part of your quote unquote white American history. And so again, sometimes you have to take that step. You have to make that extra effort to help your children appreciate the richness of the heritage, the heinous parts of the heritage, but all of it works together for their academic success. And we have to embrace that part, of our parenting.
And not even academic success, but I would say cultural pride. Like that, that is sort of, as I've matriculated and like matured, that is something that is like a cornerstone of my personality. And so I cannot tell you how many Black people I've either connected with Black people on that cultural pride, or they be like, how do you have this much cultural pride? Because I grew up in white environments. And I too grew up in white environments. It's not like I did not have a scholastic experience that included a lot of white kids. Like that's not a thing. But because I had the parents that I had, they made sure that I knew that I was Black and I was proud to be Black. And like, you know what I mean? So I think when you find kids who like don't have that, their parents chose not to give it to them. That's a lot of the crux of it. For whatever reason. Either they, half white or whatever, they got other cultural heritage or whatever, or they just figure like the Black part isn't as important as the other thing. You know what I mean? Or again, for all the factors we talking about, the survival aspect of it or the whatever, you know what I mean? There's so many things around Blackness that keep people from sharing that. And that's why I said it's not to give you an inferiority complex or make you feel less than or whatever, but it's knowing the history, knowing where you come from, having pride in that, being like, y'all know y'all telling these lies, right? And it's okay if you want to tell these lies. I'm just letting you know that I know that they're lies, and I'm going to tell them that they lies as well. You know what I mean? Yeah. I can't imagine if I was going to school now. Pammy would be pulling up to the school. If we lived in Florida right now, Pammy will be pulling up to the school every single day to cuss them people out about whatever heinous and foolish and egregious lies that they would be trying to put in my head about American history. So that's really.
Let's hit this real quick. We talked a little bit last week about the church and all that. So I just want to hit a couple of points on that real quick. It's really important that you have some kind of something to help your child hold on to when things get crazy. We have a rich heritage as part of our religion and spirit.
Hold on. Just take a minute because you're breaking up. Okay, start again.
Religion and spirituality. We talked a lot about the church last week, but I just wanted to hit on it, that it really has an effect on your child's life. You got to give them something else to hold on to in this crazy
good
world.
Or bad. Good or
whatever
bad.
That thing is for you, amen. If it's Christianity, if Islam, if whatever it is, your children need to understand that there's a power higher than them. And again, as Black parents, we have traditionally done a good job of this, but because of the way the church is changing and the Generation Z and the millennials are showing less religious involvement or respect for it than we probably grew up with, there is a shift. And so it doesn't mean they're rejecting spiritual values. It just means here's another chance for some effective parenting. How do you have dialogue with your children who are practicing a different faith, thinking a different way about faith than you thought? Your responsibility as a parent doesn't say, okay, well, I'm not fooling with them because they don't believe in Jesus or this, that, and the other. You have to evolve. You have to have a conversation that lets them explain their evolvement. Every generation needs to be heard. Every generation needs to be respected in their beliefs. And hopefully then you can come to some common ground through these complex modern parenting places that we're in, and still have a deep connection with our heritage and the African American and culture around church, and this faith that has sustained Black families for generations. So
and I think I think we're in a place with parenting, though I'm not a parent, but I think because we have been not considered human for so long, now we're talking about parenting that's more focused on personhood. It's not just about survival. Like, obviously, you got to feed the kid. You got to make sure, hopefully, keep them safe. You got to make sure they eat every day, like all of that. But you also have to be a little more mentally, emotionally, perhaps even spiritually astute to like the person that you're raising. You know what I mean? I think a lot of parenting, particularly when it comes to Black families and Black households, wasn't always about parenting. It wasn't always about personhood. Like we said, it's about survival. It's about you get here, you do this thing, you get this education, you work twice as hard to get half as much. With that half as much, you ball out. You know what I mean? You do what you got to do. You make sure you take care of, and then maybe you leave a little something for somebody else. You know what I mean? But I think that we're evolving and adapting into a more complex state of parenting. And I think that just needs to be plainly stated like that. Like, parenting is hard in general, but now you add in these extra layers too. And I think returning to some of the things that are traditionally African, which is we have always run on, just like faith has been a component, whatever that faith element is, extended family has always been a component of the African American experience. And that is African, that is historical to our survival mechanism within the family. And I think it's an evolution into this style of parenting that I would say is more personhood focused, because you might not want to tell your mom and daddy everything or your mama everything. You know what I mean? You might be super close to your granny or your aunt or your godmother or your cousins or your chosen family, right? Your friends that you chose. Like, I come out of a whole tradition of people who are Black artists that like they all became friends and now all their kids are friends. You know what I mean? And like we all consider each other cousins and family. As an artist now, I'm matriculating and finding people that I'm putting into my familiar fold. So I think for Black people, we have always sort of had blood family and we've always had chosen family. And I think that when you extend those two things, I think that you're not limited to this one structure of family. You're not limited to this one structure of parenting. And I think that makes your kid richer too. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, I grew up in a Christian household, but I've had people that are very close to me in my family that live a completely different, they're not religious, or, you know what I mean? We've always had people who are into the art. Like, we've always had people who are not conservative or traditional in our family and in our lives. So when I get in traditional church spaces, they be wanting to put the traditional jacket on me, but I'd be like, yeah, nah, I can't. I'm not able to dehumanize people in the way that you are in order to make that fit, because it's just comfortable for you. Like, I have an extended family that is made up of all type of eclectic type of people, and so that makes me an eclectic person and a hopefully deeply rooted, well-rounded person. So I think knowing that, hopefully, if you have trusted people, again, we're gonna say trusted people, because everybody don't need to be around your kid and everybody don't need to be influencing your kid. You got to suss that thing out for yourself, okay? But if you have the benefit of having extended family members and people around, I think to lean into that, so that your kid has a plethora of places to be poured into, but also a plethora of places to pour out, so that you don't feel like you're just the be all end all. I gotta have all the answers, because you probably don't, and you won't. Okay. And again, there is a way to instill cultural pride, the truth of our history, into your kids without making them feel inferior, without making them feel like they are limited in the scope of what they can do and achieve because they are Black. I don't believe that for 1 second. I think we could be anything and everything we ever wanted to be. History has proven that. Okay. They keep switching guns and changing bullets, but they can't never keep us down. We just continually keep adapting, okay, on this 29th day of February in 2024. So all of that is part of the shape shifting. I think if you want to create generational wellness effectively for Black kids, you got to put in the history, pre-slavery, through slavery in our history in this country, and know that with all the elements continually working through the things, the challenging things, the beautiful things, the complex things, we gonna be in the future. Okay, they can't erase us all. We gonna be in the future, and hopefully we will have kids that are steeped in generational wellness that they have created. They have learned to create it for themselves. They learned it from you because you created it from yourself for yourself, and now they're passing it on to others. And that is really create generational wellness. Is TED Talk on parenting in the future is that Black kids will be able to evolve and grow and stand on the shoulders of our history and not feel bogged down by it, but also dream bigger and go further and do it as well, whole, well-rounded, emotionally secure, mentally supported,
mentally supported. I like that.
Yeah, all of that, because that's really the goal. Like, our ancestors didn't literally fought, died, blood, sweat, tears for us to still be doing the same things that they was doing the same way they was doing. That was not the goal. That was not the dream. Whether you decide to stay in the States or whether you decide we off that, we finna do something else, because it is 2024 and many of us might decide that we're off that depending on how it goes. Because yet again, the Transformer is transforming, okay? We're not gonna say that man's name, but the Transformer continues to transform. And sometimes it has a face and sometimes it is faceless, but it's still very much there. And that's a part of keeping Black children alive and vibrant in the world. Again, not to scare them, just to give them their realities. If I have their realities, then I know how to maneuver. That don't mean you stopping me. It just means I have the realities in front of me and I can maneuver accordingly.
What have I always said to you? I'm not a racist. I am
racially aware, and it is for my importance, my betterment, and my survival.
I've been telling you that since you were in elementary school when you came home and called me a racist. But
that's what the people told me, so I believe them. Anyway, thank you so much for spending time with us.
Black History Month. We've had some long episodes, but
I think it's because we're doing our full history, and I think that's important because history is under attack. So that's why we're doing it. We thank you for being with us. And again, that right there, what you just saw between us, was an example of when she had to unbleach my brain, because they always be trying to bleach your brain. Anyway, we hope you've enjoyed these episodes. I know they've been a little bit longer. We did a profile or two this month. We got a few in, but I feel like the conversation, Yeah, and the historical references and like the understanding of where things come from, I think was really like the big part of this that needed to be explained and explored so that we know how we got here and then we get to decide who we want to be because we up next. We have that. So anyway, March will be a new month, the third month of the new year. Sure, whatever. I don't know what we're talking about. We don't know what we're talking about. Pammy will be back. We'll be back probably to our similar format, though I really, really like this one. We'll figure it out. Anyway, whatever we're doing, you will not know what's happening. If you are not subscribed on YouTube, follow us on IG, Facebook, fan base. We're at Create Generational Wellness on all the platforms. We hope you have a fantastic Thursday evening. We'll see you next week, same time.
I'll see you
same
Saturday.
Place. Yeah, I'll physically see her on Saturday. And I don't know, parent your own kids, parent someone else's kids, nieces, nephews, cousins. Share some of this information. You might start looking at your family. Yeah, with permission. You might start looking at your family dynamics a little different based on what we talked about in this episode and all the episodes prior to. So be sure to check those out. And with that, we out of here, boy.
Bye. Wait, did you say subscribe and fan base and Instagram?
One more time. Subscribe. See how she was not listening. Subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on IG, Facebook, fan base. We are at Create Generational Wellness on all the things, just to reiterate. All right, y'all.